The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Innovative Mine Reclamation webinar hosted by the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition. Really glad y'all could join us this afternoon. I've got a really good webinar for you. I'm Adam Wells with Appalachian Voices, and I'll go over the agenda real quick. So I'll just share a little bit of background for folks who are new to this effort about the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition and the purpose of this webinar and the work group that we've convened around innovative mine reclamation. Eric Dixon will provide a quick update on federal funding, and then we'll get to the real meat of this webinar, which is presentations from Vince Maiden of Virginia DEQ and Ben McCammett from Ohio Natural Resources. Vince will be talking about leveraging brownfield funding with potentially AML pilot funding, some of the questions around that. And then Ben will be given an overview of projects that Ohio DNR has funded through their AML Pilot Program. We will be leaving some time for questions and answers. Feel free to use the chat function in your control panel to ask a question at any time, and then I'll facilitate that when we get to the end of the agenda. So just a little bit about, for folks who are new, what we mean when we say innovative mine reclamation. So here's the working definition we've got so far. It takes a fully integrated systems level approach to ecosystem restoration while supporting the creation and growth of sustainable economic enterprises. So basically, it's the nexus of mine land reclamation and economic development with sustainable economic development projects. So we've convened this innovative mine reclamation working group to bring together people who are working in this field from across the country. So our goals at this point are to, sorry about that. There we go. All right, to attract additional funding beyond what's available through AML Pilot to help project dollars go further, to help identify good projects for pilot funding and to share things that work to make those projects happen, to develop replicable models for community outreach and engagement, which is encouraged by the OSM AML Pilot guidance. And that's really where the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition comes in. And then to bring in more people to have this conversation. So the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition is a group of 5 organizations working to provide technical assistance to groups to develop innovative mine reclamation proposals to your state AML office. And so here are the folks in different states. Adam Wells, that's me, Appalachian Voices in Virginia, Nathan Hall with Coalfield Development Corporation in West Virginia, Marissa Lawson-Heiser with Rural Action in Ohio, and then Eric Dixon with Appalachian Citizens Law Center in Kentucky. And so the 4 of us are really excited to hear from anyone out there in your state that are interested in working together to develop an innovative mine reclamation proposal for your state's AML Pilot Fund. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric to talk a little bit about the updates on the federal level with AML Pilot funding.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, appreciate you teeing us up here with a great agenda today. I will be giving a little bit of a report on the funding opportunities that were included in the federal spending legislation that Congress passed in March. This will be review for some of you, but I think it's important to kind of have on our mind as we head into the summer and as some of these new funding opportunities kind of begin to come online for this year. So there's 3 main programs that I want to talk about. The first is the AML Pilot Program. The second is Economic Development Administration funding for diversification in coal communities. And then the third is economic diversification funding in coal communities through the Appalachian Regional Commission. So I'll start off with the AML Pilot Program funding. Again, acknowledging, as we did on our first webinar, that the real experts here are the state AML directors, some of which are on the line. And I'll kind of give a rundown here, and then if those directors would like to say a little bit more about their specific state, definitely would like to hear some of that later in the call. But again, this is the AML Pilot Program started in 2016, and it's funding for the idea is to tie mine reclamation with economic development projects. The implementation of that looks a little bit different in different states. Some of the projects in some states are more reclamation heavy. Some of the projects in other states are more sort of heavy on the investment in like brick and mortar or economic development projects kind of on or nearby the site. So it depends on the state in terms of how it's being specifically implemented, but that's the general goal, is again tying these two together. And it was funded in 2016 and 2017, and President Trump proposed eliminating the program in his first budget last year, but Congress decided to keep funding the program and kept it in the bill that passed in March, and included $25 million each for Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, $10 million each for Virginia, Ohio, and Alabama, and added $10 million for Indian tribes that have abandoned mineland issues within their boundaries. So again, that's $25 million each for Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, $10 million each for Virginia, Ohio, Alabama, and $10 million for the Indian tribes. So that's very, very exciting news. The kind of timelines for and the deadlines for that money, again, this is for 2018 funding for the AML pilot. It varies by state, and I would love to get, if you're an AML director, you know more about the timeline in your state, love to get perspective on that as we go through the call. But you can contact your AML director if you're someone who's on the call who's not with the state agency. They're the best contact for that. And some of the states have deadlines posted on their websites, others don't, at least when I checked last week. So you might check the website first and then follow up with the AML office if you still have questions. So that's the AML pilot, again, for 2018. And then the two other programs, they're not about mine reclamation or degraded lands specifically, but they're really, really great opportunities to tie with AML pilot funding because they're for economic diversification in coal communities, obviously where many of these abandoned minelands are located. And the ARC, the Appalachian Regional Commission budget, was actually increased by $9 million to $155 million for 2018. And the power funding, that is the funding that's just for this economic diversification, that was preserved at $50 million of that budget. So ARC is currently taking applications for power grants for that $50 million, and would encourage you to look into that or talk to one of our groups if that's something that you're interested in learning more about or getting some technical assistance around how to apply for that funding. And then the Economic Development Administration has a similar program, $30 million for economic diversification grants through that agency. And that's not just specific to Appalachia, that is across the country, but it's $30 million. I mean, these are pretty big allotments for an annual appropriation for these programs. And, I would just encourage you all to be thinking about how we, get this funding to fund sustainable economic development projects that are really going to push us forward. And I know many of the leaders who are thinking about that are on the call. So good to be talking with you all. And I can take questions about those updates, but that's the main three things that I wanted to share on the call.
Great. Thanks a lot, Eric. And if there are questions, again, you can use the question function in your GoToWebinar control panel to ask them, and we'll do some question and answer at the end of the webinar. Okay, so I'm going to switch the screen over to Vince. All right, Vince, you should be getting a request there. And I hand it over to you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. As Adam mentioned, I'm Vince Maiden. I'm with the Virginia DEQ Brownfields Program. I'm the Brownfields Program Coordinator. I got really involved I'm from Southwest Virginia, so I am from the Appalachian region. I know how to say it. I know how to live in the Appalachians. So this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Where I grew up, even though I live in Richmond, Virginia now, I still carry the accent and the history of growing up there. So we see brownfields as an opportunity. There's an opportunity here to collaborate with the abandoned mine land pilot projects and much more. And I want to kind of go through some of the resources in brownfields and how they may relate. I'm probably going to hit you with a lot of information that you may have questions about either at the end or afterwards. And you can feel free to contact me if afterwards is the case. So what is a brownfield? So a brownfield is really any property in which the reuse or revitalization or redevelopment of is complicated by the presence or potential presence of a contaminant. So note potential presence. So even if it's like, oh, well, that old mine site, it's contaminated, so we can't do anything with it. Well, that's potential. That's perceived. It doesn't have to be real, and it still qualifies as a brownfield. So it's a very broad definition. It applies to a lot of things like factory sites, which are classic, gas stations. It also can be mine-scarred lands or an old abandoned school. So many people think they don't have brownfields in their community, but every community has brownfields that are kind of waiting to be redeveloped. Why the Brownfields program? So what's it got to do with me? So it can help you understand actual or perceived environmental conditions. You can resolve legacy environmental concerns. You can help remove environmental liability for prospective purchasers. So if somebody wants to come in and redevelop a site, they may have concerns over the environmental conditions. So our program can help get around those and possibly provide liability or comfort letters, we call them, a lot of folks call them. It promotes community engagement. That's one of the more important components we see in brownfields is when Brownfields program is involved, you really look at what the community needs, what the community wants with the property. It's not just what the local officials may want or one individual group, but we really promote community engagement. There are grants available. We hear a lot about grant money and pilot money, but Brownfields is another place where there's been a commitment at the federal and state level to make funds accessible. And often, Brownfields is kind of like the little engine that could. A little bit of money can go a long way. We've seen communities take a small grant and develop it into multi-million-dollar projects. So it can be the seed money you need to get something started in a community-wide revitalization. And I've provided links on these slides, if I don't know if Adam's going to make them available after this, that would get you to different program pages for more information. So I want to go through some of the resources. So Virginia has what we call the Virginia Brownfields Restoration and Economic Development Assistance Fund. We'll go with VBAF as an acronym to shorten that. This is available to local government entities. It could be a locality or an IDA, EDA. To date, we've given out over 60, I think it's 64 or 65 assessment and planning grants that our typical award is $50,000. We've also given out remediation grants. Recently, there were 6 grants of $2.6 million for remediation, and those can be up to $500,000. So if you do find something, there may be some resources to help clean it up. The grants have a one-to-one match, but especially for communities that have gotten an AML pilot grant, another EPA grant, or another one of these ARC grants, you may already have the match in hand to start a Brownfields project. So you may be able to get right into it with no money out of pocket. The Virginia Allies link that I provided on here is where you go to find that application. And folks can always call me to get more direction. EPA Brownfields grants, even better. They take a little longer to get because there's a process and it's a little slower, but there's no match for their assessment and planning grants. We've seen a lot of leveraging of EPA funds to access additional state brownfield funds and other things, so that's a good thing. They have several types: assessment, cleanup, area-wide planning, revolving loan fund, and other job training grants. I think they're trying to consolidate some of these this coming up year and do things a little different, but that's to be determined. I think this is a really good way to go if you're not in a hurry, but you're really trying to rethink your revitalization. The EPA grants have been really, really useful. The link that I provided is kind of a page that shows you the types of funding and something you can watch year to year. So FY18 was a good year for Southwest Virginia. Virginia Tech's Community Design Assistance Center got $300,000, and they're going to be working in the Coalfield region of Southwest Virginia with focuses on several localities like Honeacre, Pocahontas, St. Paul, and Appalachia, but that's not restricted to them. They can work in any of the Coalfields region. That's a good thing. That's potential partnership there with the AML Pilot folks. Wise County Coalition did a great job at getting something that's going to focus on the $600K on the mines card lands within the Guest River watershed. This is Wise, Coburn, and Norton, our partners. So this is, we were really excited to see these two grants land in Southwest Virginia. DEQ, we decided that we would apply for a grant in a little different area of Southwest Virginia. I call them some of the coal supporting communities that a lot of coal businesses have thrived in and over the years, and we're going to have $300,000 invested into those counties. So total, there was $1.2 million in EPA brownfield grant funding that went into the Virginia Appalachian region in this past grant cycle. $900K, as I mentioned, to the coal communities, and this really sets us up for the collaboration with the AML Pilot Program and some of the good efforts that are already going on to revitalize some of those areas. I'll throw a plug to West Virginia because I didn't get information from other states. They also got $2.8 million in brownfield funding for the Appalachian region. So this is not just a Virginia thing, and each one of the community states has, brownfields program coordinators like myself that are all committed to helping you access funds and to get through the environmental challenges that might come up along the way to redevelop the site. I really think you need to make sure you know those folks and talk to them about your projects. Again, EPA has a lot of good free assistance. They've got another program that they call their Targeted Brownfields Assessment, TBA. You don't have any money, you don't know where to get started, but you've got a site you would like to take a look at and see maybe what the environmental conditions are. There's a real easy application that you can find at the link below, or you can apply for EPA to come out, do the assessment. At the end of the project, they hand you the reports. Here's what's there, and get you kick-started on trying to get through the challenges. We've had several communities in Virginia take advantage of this. It's been helpful. West Virginia does a lot of these. They've used this tool quite well, so it's another great tool. They also hire a contractor. In this case, it's the New Jersey Institute of Technology that will help you get ready to apply for a brownfields grant and do some review and provide you for the technical assistance. I provided their link. So if you're pursuing a grant, you definitely want to touch base with them. Another free resource. How often you get free resources. So DEQ, some of the things we do specifically, our staff really is committed to the entire Commonwealth and revitalizing properties and helping, with productive reuse across the Commonwealth. But we've put a specific focus on the Southwest Virginia region, which has been underserved with some of the grants over the years. And some of that is changing, as you've seen by the numbers today. We also do something we call Brownfields individualized outreach. We come in, if you ask us for help, we'll come into your community, help you think through your brownfield sites, your goals, and determine the best path forward for you. Because every community is different. There's no one-size-fits-all project or approach. And we try to take the time to sit down with you and figure out what is best for your community. And we've done that all over the state, and more recently a lot in Southwest Virginia communities. So you can always ask for that from us. Something I do that's not the most exciting thing is I write a lot of environmental liability relief letters. So once you've used your grant money, you've got these environmental site assessments, then a developer or a prospective purchaser can apply for some liability protection letters that we may issue. Bona fide prospective purchaser is our most popular. What this does is this says that the site has been looked at, we know what's here, we know what's environmentally here, so the new purchaser is shielded from liability for the existing contamination, as long as they take appropriate care at the site and don't cause any harm. So that's a real popular letter in the development world. And those are really useful and we also have what we do, a lender liability letter. Banks love these too, because it says the bank is not liable and they give a loan on the property for redevelopment. Those are just a couple of the letters that we do. To get those, you can contact me and I can guide you through those, and I'll actually issue those to you if you're a prospective purchaser. If you already own the property, that's a little different story. You can't get liability protection when you're already the owner. It's for future owners. So you get into one of these projects, you may find some contamination that needs cleaned up. So we have another tool, which is our Voluntary Remediation Program. And this is a program that if you do have contamination and it's not mandated by some regulatory cleanup, like hazardous waste cleanup through the RECRA, CERCLA type programs, then you can take that and enter it into the voluntary program and work through it with us on a voluntary basis to clean it up, put whatever restrictions you may need into place, and then redevelop the site. This gives folks a lot of extra comfort on sites that are contaminated and kind of helps you figure out what the appropriate care is on a site that has contamination. And this is a great tool to get revitalization on sites that people before thought would just always sit there vacant, and that's not the case because they got programs like this to run it through. So what are we doing with DMME in Virginia? So we've been having an ongoing discussion and looking at the AML pilot projects that were funded and those that didn't get funding to see where Brownfields can play in to the efforts that are going forward. We've got a meeting that we're lining up in Pocahontas to think through how we can collaborate on that project with them, with the community. Hopefully that'll develop into something here in the next year. DMME also presented at our Central Appalachian Regional Brownfield Summit in Pulaski, Virginia there in April, and that was a really, really good summit. And I encourage you next time they have one of these, if you're interested in Appalachian region issues and brownfields, to go to that conference. I think there may be one in Tennessee potentially in 2019. We also are working with DMME to do a pilot on with their unmanned aerial systems, their drone program at Brownfield sites, to do evaluation of Brownfield sites, for revitalization. It could be video, mapping of the site for pre-development, and using this material to pursue additional grants to leverage what they've done so far and to move forward and get additional grants, things like that. All this is kind of fresh, new, and a lot more to come on this effort. But both DEQ and DMME staff are really committed to the region and to working together to kind of maximize the resources that are available. I'll speak for them, but they can weigh in if they choose. We just had an example. This is not all new. The Brownfield site has worked on some tipple sites. One example was in Lee County, Stone Creek tipple site, and you can see the before and after picture. These sites, they're not the big glamorous, redevelopment of some shiny new building. Always, they can be a simple green space that the community can use to, have their kids play or to walk or to take their dogs, and that can be an important project for a community. It doesn't always have to be a mega dollar, redevelopment project. It can be something that improves community health, makes the area a better place to live, protects people from, any contamination that was there in the past. So I just wanted to highlight that as to me, a success story that may seem small but can be important to a community. Now that I've hit you with lots of information, I'll give you what's probably more important is contact information. I'm the program coordinator for Brownfields. Meade Anderson served in that role for many years. He's now the program manager for Brownfields and the Voluntary program. He's a great resource as well. So if you can't find me, you can always contact Meade, and we will. We're spread pretty thin because it's one Brownfield staff and then Meade's the manager, and that's it for Virginia. But we also do a lot for a small staff, and that's really all I have, Adam.
All right, thanks so much, Vince. That was a lot of really great information. Got some questions that came in that I'll save until the end in case they might be addressed by Ben, or in case people want to refine their questions. But just two things that I'll say while I'm switching the screens here back to me is, yes, I will be sharing the slides with the listserv that have all the links. And what I'll also share is the full list of EPA Brownfield funding announcements that came out a couple weeks ago that includes the ones in Virginia that Vince shared, as well as the ones across the country. So be on the lookout for that on the Innovative Mine Reclamation listserv. So Ben, you still with us and you ready to go?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm Ben McCammett with the Ohio AML program. I'm filling in for Jim Bishop on this. He's kind of leading the pilot effort. He's our AML manager for the state. So hopefully I can answer most of the questions if there are questions, but and I'll do my best to kind of give you an update on where we're at with the pilot projects and funding. So like was mentioned before, Ohio was funded in the second year of pilot funding and received $10 million in 2017, and in 2018 we'll receive another $10 million. Although those funds have not been allocated yet or processed. So right now, Ohio has access to the $10 million in the 2017 pilot funding. So as of right now, there's about 8 projects that are in development that are, which means that there's at least substantial activity going on. There's more than that as far as like project ideas or conceptual ideas that just need a little bit more time to flush out. But I was kind of going to focus on the 8 projects that are a little bit further moved along for this conversation. Of those 8 projects, there's about 12.9 million expected that could be used for the pilot funds, and leveraging about 1.2 million. Again, a lot of those projects are rough costs, so those numbers could fluctuate substantially. None of the projects, and Ohio just received the 2017 pilot funding, I believe, early this year, as far as like submitting the grant to OSM allocating the funds, those funds being available to us. So no projects are in sort of construction phase yet. They're all in the project development phase. I believe that at least one or two of those projects should be moving into the construction phase in the next couple months. So hopefully we get those started soon. The focus of the project so far has been, a lot of them have, 6 out of the 8 involve public properties or nonprofit ownership. So like a park district or something like that, which is still quasi public ownership, or it is public, but local, not state or federally public lands. 4 of the sites involve reclaiming Priority 1 high walls. 3 of them involve various reclamation techniques and site development for like future use. And then 4 of them have a recreation focus. So there's reclamation of a site, and then the end use is going to be some sort of recreation, like camping, hiking, hunting, nature, birding. So there's a whole mix of types of projects that have been proposed so far. The partners, there's a pretty long list of people in the state who have been involved so far, and I think that list is going to expand. We're going to try to reach out to more people, particularly now that the second year of funding for pilot has been announced. But those include economic development agencies, like we have one in Ohio called the Ohio Mideastern Governors Association. Include our ODNR Division of Wildlife, which is property owner and for one of the sites. Jobs Ohio, which is our economic development agency in Ohio. 2 parks or park districts, kind of regional park districts, or specific, they might have a couple of different parks, but they're a local park. The Ohio Public Works Commission. One site is actually a ball field association. One is another site is dealing with a community improvement corporation, so a sort of an industrial park area. And then another one is like the Wilds, which is actually managed by the Columbus Zoo, and they have a large like free-ranging area for wildlife, for exotic wildlife, and they use mine lands for that. They own like 6,000 acres of mine lands. One part of it is actually abandoned mine lands. And then Rural Action as well. So quite a few partners. I think there's a potential for more moving forward now that more funding is available. The 3 projects that should be starting soon are ones that we had, I think, some initial work done on already, because there was an anticipation of the power funding, and the original guidance was you're going to have to only have like a year to get these projects out. So these were projects that could kind of get in the hopper quickly, and know that we could get on the ground. And those all involve Priority 1 high wall reclamation, where the end use of the property, those are all, 2 of them is public and 1 is private property. 2 of them involve expanding park areas and visitation, and 1 is site development for railways in Harrison County. So far, I would say, reviewing all the projects that have been proposed, most of them involve using the AML pilot fund as a way to get the initial sort of reclamation done and the site development started, and then the landowner or a partner can then do the next phase, which is, you know, further enhancing the site for their purposes. So an example would be a project with the Wilds, which they have this large area. They get tons of visitors to come and see all these like African animals and all over the world, like roaming kind of freely in these pastures and these fenced in mine area. But they want to develop the AML area on their site, which is about 1,000, maybe 900 acres as well, and for primitive camping and bike trails and hiking trails, fishing, kayaking. There's a lot of lakes. These are all fairly good water quality. So the AML funds, the pilot funds, will be used for site access, developing a primitive campground, parking area, the site, and an RV campground. And then after that's done, then the Wilds would additionally add all the utilities and build the actual pads and, you know, kind of finish the campgrounds and trails. That's just an example of one. Another example of a project along the same lines is a park called Sally Buffalo Park in Harrison County, where there's a large high wall on a public park, and that's going to be reclaimed. And then after the site's reclaimed, we're going to reclaim it in partnership with the park, sort of to build it, to do it how they want it. And then they're going to add campground sites in that area as well. There's other examples, you know, of projects as well. Like one of them is where there's a baseball field in a community, and right next to it is an old mine site, and the community would like a soccer field as well. So I think we're going to try to work with them using the pilot funds to reclaim that area and then actually build a soccer field for the community on that site as well, and increase their parking and sort of recreation focus. So there's at least in this initial round, there seems to be a pretty good a focus on sort of recreation and outdoor areas, camping, hiking. The other park one, and along those same lines, is the Friendship Park, where we're reclaiming about 100 acres, including high walls. And then we're working with the park to replant all native vegetation, so that they can build trails and attract more birders, and really sort of use that as the nature, you know, area on their park to attract more visitors. So, you know, that's kind of an overview. I don't know if there's more, Adam, if you wanted me to cover. I didn't have slides or anything to show at this point, or if you want to go to questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and really appreciate you getting on, and especially Ben shared that he's been getting over bronchitis, so appreciate you talking through a long conference call, recovering from that. I've got one question for you. We've got a couple queued up, but since you're talking, you've mentioned a couple of these key ingredients to success, and just wondering if you can think of a few others, since Ohio's been through the pilot process once already and have made the awards. Kind of looking back, what were the key elements that these successful proposals had that you could share with a group that is thinking about applying in 2018? A couple that you listed already were partnerships, of course, and kind of seeing this as a
Right.
phase 1, phase 2 kind of deal. Are there other of those kind of key elements that you could share with folks?
From what I can tell so far is I think that it has to be to be successful, and this kind of goes along with all projects, not just pilot, but it would obviously apply to pilot, is really having the buy-in from the landowner, and the partners who are going to work with you, because you're talking about potentially a lot of money, and there are timelines, and you want to get these projects done quickly because that's the intent of the funding, right? To provide that revitalization, economic development. So really, we've had a few projects, for example, that might have been good ideas, but once we kind of drafted stuff up, worked with some partners, and then when we actually got further down the line, there was complications because landowners really weren't on board or whatever. So I would say that would be key early on, to really discuss the site and who, and make sure that this is going to move forward before investing a large amount of time into something and then have the carpet pulled out from under you, which can happen on any project, as everybody knows. But I say having that initial buy-in is definitely key.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. And yeah, I think we could have a whole other series of webinars on land ownership and the challenges that presents, especially when working with mine-scarred lands in Appalachia. But maybe we'll save that one for a future webinar. I'm sure that's an issue that many people have grappled with over the years. We got a question I guess this one's for Vince, about speaking of ownership. I assume that the question is, I assume brownfield implementation sites must be owned by the applicants. Is that correct?
No. So if a community has an interest in seeing a property revitalized and they don't own it, they can apply for assessment and planning grant as long as they can get site access to do that assessment, to do some planning to help get that site ready for a market or ready for redevelopment and reuse. So they do not have to own it. So the only catch is if you want to do remediation. So if the community wants to do remediation on a site, then they must own the site for the remediation side. But a lot of sites that go through our Brownfields program are not owned by the applicant, which is the community EDA or IDA.
Great. Thanks, Vince. Eric, there's a question for you about the potential of pilot funding in the 2019 budget as that's being shaped up. Can you share anything about how it's looking for pilot in the coming fiscal year?
Well, it's really early to tell. I think that the president's budget this year also cuts the program. But what we do know is that the champions that have fought for that funding in previous years are still very supportive of it. And, it's always good to, especially actually right now, given the schedule of the appropriations process, it's good right now to let your legislators know that that's a priority for you, or for your community. But yeah, I think it's encouraging the support that it still has on the Hill for 2019 funding, but kind of too early to tell exactly what it looks like.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. I've got a question for you, Vince. You showed the example of the Stone Creek tipple down in Lee County, which is a really great one that was turned into a community park. And one of just a little bit of the backstory behind that is that, as some folks may know, tipples are cold tipples can be in this kind of gray area where, depending on when they're constructed, they might not be required to be reclaimed under current SMACRA law, and they might not be eligible for abandoned mine land funding either. And so I think that tipple was one of those that fell into that kind of orphaned site category, and that's why the Brownfields funding was so great for it, because it was kind of filled that gap. So Vince, my question is, are there other coal-related sites that kind of fall in that same vein that have either been remediated through brownfield funding or that could be that you've thought about?
You know, and Mead had worked on some other projects too, and there was one in Norton, another tipple site that we worked on. Really, there's just not been communities pursuing these options on that many coal-related sites, even though there seems to be lots of opportunity for it in the past. But the two that I'm aware of are tipple sites that we did environmental assessment type work and get grants for it, like in Norton. That can be important to get kind of that site, understand the site, know what's there, get it ready for some type of reuse. But I think there'll be a lot more to come, and as I pointed out, it's really broad definition of brownfield. So you know, if there's been mining activities, it's likely a brownfield. You know, or it can be eligible for grants and funding to help get you rolling.
All right. Thanks, Vince. Well, that is it for the questions that have come in. We've got folks' emails up on the screen, so feel free to reach out if you've got more questions. One of my favorite things in the world is a conference call that wraps up early, so this falls into that bucket. Good job, y'all. A big thanks to Vince and Ben for joining us and being our panelists, as well as to Eric and others on the coalition for helping host this. And thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.